I didn't donate blood to be a hero. I did it because the van was parked outside the grocery store, and I had time. It was one of those ordinary afternoons where nothing feels important. The sky was dull, my shopping list was short, and I remember thinking I might as well do something useful before going home. I had donated once or twice years ago. Nothing special had ever come of it. Inside the van, everything smelled clean and slightly metallic. The nurse smiled, asked routine questions, and handed me a form. Name, date of birth, medical history, family history. I filled it out without hesitation. Healthy. No major conditions. Nothing unusual. I lay back on the narrow bed, watching the bag slowly fill with dark red blood. I felt fine. Calm. A little bored, if I'm honest. We chatted about the weather, about how busy they'd been lately. Normal conversation for a normal day. Before I left, the nurse said something casually. If anything unusual comes up in the screening, someone may contact you. It's rare, but it happens. I nodded without thinking. That sentence meant nothing to me at the time. It felt like one of those things people are trained to say. I went home, put the groceries away, and forgot about the whole thing. For almost 2 weeks. Then my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Hospital code. I almost didn't answer. I usually don't pick up calls I don't recognize. But something made me swipe the screen. The woman on the line spoke gently, carefully. Hello, this is the Blood Services Center. Is this? She said my name. Yes, I replied. She paused. Just for a second. Long enough for my stomach to tighten. We received your test results, she said. There are a few things we'd like to discuss. Nothing urgent, but we'd like you to come in. I asked the obvious question. Is something wrong? Another pause. It's complicated, she said. Better discuss. Probably nothing. Iron levels. Minor irregularity. They always say not to worry. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That night, I slept badly. Not because I was scared, but because my mind kept circling that word. Complicated. The next morning, as I drove to the center, I felt strangely disconnected from myself. Like I was heading toward something I couldn't see yet, but my body already sensed. I didn't know then that I wasn't going in to talk about my health. I was going in to have my life quietly rearranged. The building was brighter than I expected. White walls, polished floors, the kind of place designed to feel reassuring. It didn't work. Not for me. I checked in at the desk and sat down. People around me flipped through magazines or stared at their phones. No one looked worried. No one looked like their entire understanding of themselves was about to change. After a few minutes, a woman in a lab coat called my name. She smiled politely, but her eyes were serious. Observant. She led me into a small room and asked me to sit. A folder lay open on the desk between us. My name was printed neatly on the front. She didn't start with small talk. Thank you for coming in, she said. I want to explain why we asked you here. I nodded, folding my hands in my lap. She took a breath, then spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. During routine screening, we test donated blood for several markers. Most of the time, results are exactly as expected. In your case, one result stood out. My chest tightened, but I stayed quiet. She turned the folder toward me, pointing to a line of text I didn't understand. This marker suggests a genetic trait that doesn't match the family history you provided. Not who you believe it to be. The words landed softly, almost politely, but my mind rejected them immediately. That can't be right, I said. Not angrily, just confidently. There must be a mistake. She nodded, as if she expected that response. That's always a possibility, she said. Which is why we repeated the test. Twice. She slid another page toward me. The results were consistent. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. I laughed once, awkwardly. You're telling me a blood test is questioning my parents? She didn't smile. I'm saying the results strongly suggest you may not be biologically related to one of them. I stared at the paper. Letters and numbers blurred together. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I knew what it meant. 40 years of certainty, suddenly reduced to a footnote. I asked the question that felt safest. Which one? She didn't answer right away. We can't determine that without further testing, she said. But given the pattern, it most commonly points to paternity. I felt something hollow open up in my chest. Not pain exactly. Absence. My father. I left the building in a daze. I don't remember signing out or walking to my car. I only remember sitting behind the wheel, hands frozen, staring straight ahead. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. Did you donate blood today? I stared at the screen. And for the first time in my life, a simple question felt like a trap. I didn't reply to my mother right away. I sat there in the car, engine off, phone in my hand, reading her message again and again. It wasn't unusual for her to ask about my day. She had always been attentive like that. But now, every word felt heavier than it should have. Did you donate blood today? I wondered if she knew, or if she was simply making conversation. That question followed me all the way home. Inside my house, everything looked the same. Shoes by the door. A jacket thrown over the chair. The ordinary life I had lived there, untouched. And yet, I felt like a guest in it. I put the kettle on, more out of habit than desire. My hands moved automatically while my mind stayed stuck in that small white room with the lab coat and the folder. There's a strong likelihood. I had never questioned my parents. Not once. My childhood memories were simple and solid. My father teaching me how to ride a bike. His hand steady on the seat, his voice calm behind me. Family dinners. Shared jokes. A life that made sense. Blood tests didn't belong in those memories. I finally texted my mother back. Yes. Why? The reply came almost instantly. Oh, nothing. Just checking. How did it go? How did it go? I stared at those words until my tea went cold. What was I supposed to say? That a nurse and a folder had quietly undone 40 years of family truth? That my blood carried a story no one had ever told me? Fine, I typed. They said everything was normal. I hated myself for lying, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was imagining confrontation or anger, but because my mind kept replaying my life, searching for clues that might have been there all along. I examined old moments with new eyes. The way my father never commented on how much I looked like him. The jokes about me taking after some distant relative. The silence around certain family stories. Had it all been obvious, and I had simply chosen not to see it? Or was this really the first crack? The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of detachment. I went to work. Answered emails. Smiled when spoken to. No one noticed anything different. That was the most unsettling part. My world hadn't stopped, but mine had shifted completely. At lunch, I found myself watching people around me, wondering how many of them were living with truths they didn't know yet. How many and I couldn't decide which thought scared me more. That he wasn't my biological father, or that everyone else might have known, except me. I avoided my parents for a few days after that. Not intentionally. Not dramatically. I just delayed. I let calls ring a little longer. I replied to messages with short answers. I told myself I needed time to think, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid of what their faces might reveal. When you grow up believing something for 40 years, you don't confront it all at once. You approach it carefully, like a room you're not sure is safe anymore. On the fourth day, my mother called again. Her voice was warm, familiar. Too familiar. "You sound tired," she said. "Are you okay?" "Yes," I replied automatically. Then I paused. "Actually, can we talk?" There was a shift in the silence that followed. A subtle one. But it was there. "Of course," she said. "About what?" I almost told her then. Almost said everything in one breath. But instead, I asked a smaller question. "Do you remember when I was born? Was there anything unusual? Medically, I mean." She laughed softly. "Unusual? No. Why would there be?" "I don't know," I said. "I was just curious." Another pause. "You're asking strange questions," she said, lightly. "Is something going on?" I told her no. Again. Another lie added to the pile. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even betrayal yet. It was instability. The ground beneath me felt less solid, like something essential had been loosened. Every memory I touched felt slightly altered, as if someone had changed the lighting in a familiar room. That weekend, I pulled out old photo albums. Not because I expected answers, but because I needed to see my life laid out in front of me. There I was as a baby, cradled in my father's arms. A toddler on his shoulders. A teenager standing awkwardly beside him, both of us smiling in that stiff way people do for cameras. He looked proud. Protective. Real. Nothing in those photos suggested a lie. And yet, the blood test existed. That contradiction stayed with me, the man who raised me, and the biology that now questioned him. I realized then that this wasn't just about genetics. It was about trust. About who gets to define family. About whether truth has an expiration date. About how much of a life can be built on silence. I didn't confront anyone that weekend. But I knew I would. Because once a question like this enters your life, it does not leave quietly. It waits. And it grows. I decided not to ask my father first. That choice surprised me, but it felt right. He had always been steady, gentle, predictable. If there was a truth hidden somewhere, I sensed it wouldn't come from him directly, not at first. So I went looking elsewhere. I started with paperwork. Old documents tucked away in drawers. Birth certificates. School records. Medical forms I had never paid attention to before. I wasn't hunting for proof yet, just patterns. Dates. Names. Anything that didn't quite line up. Everything looked normal. Too normal. That was the unsettling part. Lies that last 40 years don't leave obvious fingerprints. They learn how to blend in. I called the blood center back and asked if they could explain the results again, slowly, in plain language. The technician didn't sound surprised. She sounded like someone who had done this before. "These markers don't lie," she said. "They don't tell stories. They just match or they don't." "And you're sure?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "As sure as science allows." Science. Calm. Indifferent. It didn't care how much I loved my father or how many memories I had built with him. It only cared about what ran in my veins. That night, I sat alone in the living room and tried to imagine my life with this knowledge fully accepted. I pictured family gatherings, holidays, conversations where I would smile. Inside me, it felt exhausting. I realized then that silence wasn't protecting anyone anymore. It was just postponing the damage. A few days later, I drove to my parents' house without calling ahead. The familiar street made my chest tighten. Same trees. Same driveway. Same door I had walked through thousands of times. My father opened it. "Hey," he said, smiling. "This is a surprise." I hugged him, and for a moment, everything in me wanted to stop. To forget the blood test. To go back to believing that some truths are better left untouched. But I had crossed a line I couldn't step back over. We sat at the kitchen table. My mother poured tea. The three of us, just like always. I took a breath. "I donated blood recently," I said. My mother's hand froze mid-pour. Just for a second. But it was enough. That was the moment I knew. She recovered quickly. Too quickly. "Oh," my mother said, setting the teapot down. "That's good of you." My father nodded, unaware, smiling into his cup. "Always doing the right thing," he said. I watched them closely then, not like a child, but like a stranger learning a language. Every movement felt louder. Every silence heavier. "There was a follow-up," I continued. My voice sounded steady, even to me. "They asked me to come in." My father looked up. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said. Then I added, "Mostly." My mother didn't look at me. She reached for the sugar bowl, even though she never took sugar in her tea. "They said something came up in the tests," I went on. "Something genetic." The room seemed to hold its breath. "What kind of thing?" my father asked, still calm, still trusting. I turned to my mother. I hadn't planned to. It just happened. "They said one of my biological parents might not be who I think." Silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that confirms things. My father laughed softly. "That's ridiculous," he said. "Tests make me—" Then closed again. "Mom," I said. She sat down slowly, as if her legs had given out without warning. Her hands folded in her lap, fingers twisting together the way they did when she was nervous, something I hadn't noticed in years. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said quietly. My father turned to her. "Find out what?" She didn't answer him. She looked at me instead. "I thought it would stay buried," she said. I truly did. My chest tightened. "So it's true." She nodded. "Once." My father stared at her, confusion replacing the smile I had known my entire life. "What is she talking about?" he asked. My mother's voice trembled, but she didn't cry. "Your father is your father in every way that matters," she said. "But biologically, no." The word landed hard. No. I felt dizzy, but I stayed seated. I didn't want to fall apart in front of them. I didn't want to give anyone that moment. My father pushed his chair back slowly. "You're saying she's not mine?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. I'm saying she's yours. Just not by blood." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. As if searching for something new, something unfamiliar. I had never seen that expression on his face before. And I realized, in that moment, that this lie hadn't just shaped my life. It had shaped his too. No one spoke for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, as if it had suddenly decided to remind us that time was still moving, even though we weren't. My father remained standing, one hand resting on the back of the chair, his knuckles pale. "How long?" he finally asked. My mother swallowed. 40 years. The number hung in the air between us. It felt heavier than anything else she had said. "You knew," he said slowly. Not accusing. Just trying to understand. "All this time, you knew." She nodded. My father sat down heavily, as if the strength had drained from his legs. He didn't look at her. He looked at the table. At his hands. I had never seen him like that. "I loved her," he said quietly. "I loved her as my own." "You still do," my mother said quickly. "That hasn't changed." He looked up then, his eyes wet but steady. "It changes something," he said. "I just don't know what yet." I wanted to speak, to comfort him, to say something that would make sense of it all. But my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Every word felt inadequate. "I didn't know for sure until after you were born," my mother continued. "There was someone else. Briefly. Before your father and I were solid. I thought the timing worked. I hoped." She stopped, shaking her head. I told myself the truth didn't matter if the love was real. I felt a strange mix of emotions rise in me, sympathy for her fear, anger at her silence, guilt for being the proof of it all. "So everyone just agreed not to say anything?" I asked. "No," she said softly. "There was no agreement. There was just avoidance." My father finally looked at me again. His gaze was full of pain, but also something else. Relief, maybe. That I was still me. "I don't care whose blood you carry," he said. "You're my child." I nodded, but inside, something still felt unsettled. Because even though love hadn't disappeared, certainty had. That afternoon ended quietly. No shouting. No dramatic exit. Just exhaustion. When I drove home later, the world felt slightly unreal. Traffic lights changed. People crossed streets. Life carried on. But I was carrying something new now. A truth that had waited 40 years for a blood test to set it free. And I didn't yet know what to do with it. I didn't go back to my parents' house, untethered. Not lost, just unanchored. Like something that had been holding me steady had loosened, and my body hadn't figured out how to adjust yet. I kept replaying my father's words. "You're my child." They mattered. Deeply. But they didn't answer everything. Because love and truth are not opposites. And having one does not cancel the need for the other. At home, I moved through my days quietly. Work. Meals. Sleep. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not friends. Not colleagues. It felt too personal, too unfinished to be spoken out loud. Instead, I listened. To how my body reacted when I thought about my father. To the strange neutrality I felt toward the unknown man whose blood I carried. To the quiet grief for a version of my life that no longer existed. I realized something unsettling during that time. I wasn't grieving a person. I was grieving certainty. For 40 years, my story had been simple. 2 parents. 1 family. A clear line back through time. Now that line had bent, and my mind kept trying to straighten it. I caught myself studying my reflection more closely. My eyes. My nose. The shape of my hands. Features I had never questioned before now felt like clues. Where did this come from? Who did this belong to? I didn't like that feeling. It made me feel disloyal, as if curiosity itself were a betrayal. One evening, my father called. "I just wanted to hear your voice," he said. Nothing else. No questions. No explanations. We talked about ordinary things. The weather. A neighbor's dog. A recipe he had tried and failed. He laughed at himself the same way he always had. When we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. That call grounded me more than anything else had. It reminded me that biology may explain origins, but it does not explain devotion. It does not explain showing up, year after year, choosing someone again and again. Still, the question: protect it. And how much of my life had been built around a silence I never agreed to? That question stayed with me longer than I expected. Not in a loud, demanding way, but quietly, like something tapping from inside the walls of a house you've lived in forever. You don't hear it at first. Then one day, you realize it has always been there. I started remembering small moments from my childhood that had never seemed important before. Family gatherings where certain stories were skipped. Old photos where someone had been cropped out. The way my mother used to tense when conversations drifted toward the past, toward years before I was born. At the time, I had assumed it was modesty, or forgetfulness, or simply the way people move on. Now, it looked different. I didn't confront her again right away. I wasn't ready. I needed to understand my own feelings before adding more weight to hers. Instead, I did something I never thought I would do. I requested my original birth records. It wasn't easy. Forms, waiting periods, official language that reduced my existence to dates and signatures. Still, I filled everything out carefully. I told myself I was only curious, but I knew that wasn't the full truth. I was looking for context. When the envelope finally arrived weeks later, I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit on the table, untouched, while I made tea and paced the room. My heart wasn't racing. It felt heavy, steady, prepared. Inside were copies. Clinical. Impersonal. No name I didn't recognize. No dramatic reveal. Just a few notes that confirmed what I already knew, that there had been uncertainty at the time, carefully managed and quietly sealed. I felt disappointed, then relieved. Part of me had hoped for a clear answer. Another part was grateful not to have one forced on me. That night, I thought about the man whose blood ran through me, whoever he was. I didn't feel anger toward him. A stranger you once passed on the street. What mattered more was the life I had lived. The one built with bedtime stories, scraped knees, long talks in the car, and a father who never once treated me as anything other than his own. Blood could explain where I came from, but it could not explain who I was. And for the first time since the truth had surfaced, that thought brought me a sense of calm. Calm doesn't mean the questions disappear. It just means they stop shouting. I began to accept that I might never know the full truth, and that knowing everything was not the same as understanding myself. Still, there were conversations left unfinished, and one of them waited patiently between my mother and me. I went to see her on a quiet afternoon. No warning. No dramatic entrance. Just a knock on the door she opened with the same familiar smile, one that faded slightly when she saw my face. We sat in the living room, sunlight falling across the carpet. For a while, we talked about nothing important. Tea. Neighbors. The ordinary safety of small talk. Then I said, "I need to ask you something." She nodded, already bracing herself. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked. Not sharply. Not accusingly. Just honestly. Her hands tightened around her cup. "Because I was afraid," she said. "Afraid you'd look at me differently. Afraid you'd look at him differently. Afraid I'd break something that was working." "It was my life," I said softly. "Didn't I deserve the truth?" "Yes," she replied immediately. "You did. I know that now." There was no defense in her voice. Just regret. She told me the story then, not in detail, not dramatically. Just enough. A relationship that ended before it mattered. A timeline that overlapped more than it should have. A choice made in fear, reinforced by years of silence. "I told myself I was protecting you," she said. "But really, She hadn't lied out of cruelty. She had lied out of fear. That didn't excuse it. But it explained it. When I left that day, I didn't feel closure. I felt understanding, and that was something different entirely. Some truths don't arrive to be forgiven. They arrive to be carried with clarity. And for the first time since donating blood, I felt like I was standing on my own ground again. Standing on my own ground felt unfamiliar at first. For most of my life, my sense of self had been supported by a story handed down to me, simple, complete, unquestioned. Now that story had shifted, and I had to decide what parts of it still belonged to me. I noticed how carefully I chose my words when talking to my parents after that. Not cautious, considerate. We were all learning how to exist inside a truth that had arrived late. My father never brought it up unless I did. He didn't ask questions. He didn't seek reassurance. He just stayed the same, steady, present, reliable in the quiet ways that mattered most. That constancy did something important. It reminded me that while biology can surprise you, commitment rarely does. There were moments when I caught him watching me, his expression thoughtful, as if he were measuring whether something between us had changed. When our eyes met, he would smile, and the moment would pass. Nothing needed to be said. I began to understand that the lie hadn't erased the past, it had only added a layer to it. The memories were still real. The love was still real. The years hadn't suddenly become counterfeit. They were still mine. I also noticed something else. I was less angry than I expected to be. Disappointed, yes. Sad, at times. But anger requires an enemy, and I didn't have one. Just people who had made imperfect choices and lived with them for a long time. That realization softened me. I stopped feeling like understanding of the life I was already living. That shift didn't happen overnight. It happened quietly, in small moments of recognition. Like realizing I didn't need answers to move forward. Like understanding that identity isn't undone by new information. Like seeing that love doesn't become weaker just because it isn't biological. And once I saw those things clearly, I felt something loosen inside me. Not relief. Acceptance. Acceptance didn't arrive with certainty. It arrived with permission. Permission to stop searching for something that might never be found. Permission to let the past remain complicated without needing to resolve every detail. Permission to define my life on my own terms, rather than by the circumstances of my birth. I noticed how differently I listened to people after that. When someone spoke about their family, their history, their sense of belonging, I paid closer attention. Not with envy or comparison, but with understanding. Everyone carries something unspoken. Everyone's story has missing pages. Mine just happened to be revealed by a blood test. I stopped checking records. Stopped replaying conversations. Stopped imagining what the unknown man might have been like. Curiosity faded into something quieter, indifference mixed with peace. One evening, my father and I sat together on the porch as the sun went down. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about nothing in particular. A neighbor walking by. A memory from a trip years ago. The way time seems to speed up without warning. At one point, he said, "You know, I never questioned being your father." I looked at him. "Not once," he continued. "From the moment I held you, that was settled." There was no pride in his voice. No defensiveness. Just truth. That sentence closed something inside me that I hadn't known was still open. I realized then that the lie hadn't defined my family, fear had. And fear, unlike love, it had been set down, even awkwardly, even late. There was room to breathe again. I didn't thank the blood donation center. I didn't blame it either. It had simply done its job, revealed something that already existed. What mattered was what I chose to do with that truth. And I chose not to let it break me. I chose to let it clarify. Clarifying something doesn't always make it easier. Sometimes it just makes it quieter. Life didn't change dramatically after that. There was no big announcement, no family meeting to reset everything. Instead, things settled into a new normal, one that felt slightly different, but not broken. I noticed how carefully my mother chose her words around me now. How she watched my face when she spoke, as if checking for cracks. I didn't blame her for that. Guilt has its own language, and she was learning how to speak it. We never revisited the details. Not because they didn't matter, but because they mattered less than how we moved forward. Some conversations are about healing, not information. There were moments when I felt an unexpected tenderness toward her. Carrying a lie for 40 years is not easy. It shapes you. It tightens you. It makes every happy moment slightly anxious, every milestone slightly fragile. That didn't excuse what she had done, but it helped me understand the cost she had paid as well. I also noticed something change in myself. I stopped introducing my parents in my head as my biological parents. That distinction no longer felt necessary. My father didn't become smaller in my story just because biology stepped aside. If anything, his presence felt stronger, chosen, proven, lived. The truth had rearranged the edges of my identity, but the center remained solid. I began to see my life as something layered rather than fractured. Childhood memories, adult understanding, new context, all existing together because it had been integrated. One afternoon, while walking alone, I realized I hadn't thought about the blood test all day. That surprised me. It felt like noticing a scar you've had for a while, still there, but no longer painful. I smiled to myself then. Not because I was glad it happened, but because I knew I would be okay. Being okay didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering without feeling pulled apart. There were still moments when the truth surfaced unexpectedly. A medical form asking for family history. A casual joke about inherited traits. Each time, I felt a brief pause inside me, a recalibration, and then life moved on. I learned to answer questions differently. Not with confusion, not with defensiveness. Just with honesty, shaped carefully. I don't have full information, I would say. And that was enough. That sentence carried no shame. It carried clarity. I noticed how freeing it was to admit that some things are simply unknown. For most of my life, I had believed that adulthood meant certainty, that growing up meant having clear answers about where you come from and who you are. Now I understood something gentler. Adulthood is learning how to live well with uncertainty. One evening, while sorting through old things, I came across a letter my father had written to me years earlier, a short note tucked into a birthday card. I had kept it without thinking much of it at the time. Proud of you. Always have been. Always will be. I read it slowly, then folded it back into the envelope. That sentence didn't need genetics to stand. I realized then that the blood test had revealed a lie, but it had also revealed something else. The truth of how love had been practiced in my life. Quietly. Consistently. Without conditions. The lie had existed in silence. The love had existed in action. And when I weighed the two, the answer became clear. My story wasn't broken. It was fuller than I had known. Fullness comes with responsibility. Once the shock faded and the truth found its place inside me, I understood that I had a choice to make. Not about whether to accept what I had learned, that part was already happening, but about how much space I would allow it to take in my life. I could let it become a defining moment, or I could let it become a meaningful one. There is a difference. A defining moment tries to explain everything that comes after it. A meaningful one simply informs you, quietly, as you continue living. I chose the second. That didn't mean pretending it never happened. It meant not organizing my entire identity around it. I didn't want every future decision, every relationship, every thought about myself to pass through that single discovery. I had lived 40 years as myself before the blood test. I wasn't about to undo all of that with one piece of information. I began paying attention to what actually made me feel like me. The way I listen before I speak. The way I stay calm when others rush. The way I value consistency over excitement. Those traits didn't come from a lab result. They came from years of being raised, guided, corrected, and loved. I also noticed that the anger I thought might arrive never really did. There was disappointment, yes. Sadness. A sense of loss for something uncomplicated that no longer existed. But anger needs somewhere to land. And there was nowhere for it to settle. My father hadn't deceived me. My mother hadn't acted out of malice. And the unknown man had played no role in my life at all. So instead of anger, there was reflection. I thought about how many families are held together not by truth, but by timing. How many decisions are made in fear and then reinforced by years of silence. How easily a lie can become routine when it's never challenged. I didn't excuse it, but I understood it. And understanding, I was learning, is sometimes the most powerful form of resolution. Understanding changed the way I carried the truth. It no longer felt like something to hold carefully. It felt rounded, worn smooth by thought and time. Still present, but no longer dangerous. I noticed how rarely I thought about the unknown man now. When I did, it wasn't with longing or resentment. Just acknowledgement. A fact, not a figure. A detail, not a destiny. What stayed with me more was the quiet courage it took to live honestly after learning something like this. Not just for me, but for my parents too. They were navigating their own reckoning, one that didn't come with clear instructions or an obvious end. My mother tried, in small ways, to make things right. She checked in without hovering. She apologized without dramatizing it. Sometimes, she said nothing at all, and let that be enough. My father remained exactly who he had always been. That consistency became a kind of anchor. It reminded me that while truth can arrive late, love doesn't expire. It doesn't get retroactively cancelled by new information. One afternoon, while helping him with something small around the house, he said casually, "You know, I never felt tricked." I looked at him, surprised. "I felt hurt," he continued. "Confused. But never tricked. Because what we had was real." That distinction mattered. It meant the lie hadn't hollowed out the years we shared. It had simply existed alongside them, hidden and unresolved. I realized then that the blood test hadn't revealed a single lie. It had revealed how many lives can be shaped by one, quietly, slowly, without anyone intending harm. And it made me gentler. With my parents. With myself. With the idea that truth, when delayed, doesn't always arrive to destroy, sometimes it arrives to recalibrate. I wasn't the same person I had been before donating blood. But I wasn't broken either. I was informed. And that felt like enough to keep going. Being informed came with a strange kind of freedom. I no longer felt the need to protect anyone from the truth, including myself. What had been revealed, like a new room added to a house I knew well. I didn't have to stand in it all the time. I just needed to know it was there. I noticed how my reactions softened in situations that once would have unsettled me. Conversations about family, ancestry, inheritance, they no longer pulled at me the way they used to. I listened without comparing, without measuring, without needing to place myself precisely within someone else's story. Mine was already enough. I also noticed something else, something quieter but important. I trusted myself more. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had faced something deeply unsettling and survived without losing my sense of self. That kind of experience leaves a mark, but it also leaves confidence behind. There were moments when people spoke casually about bloodlines, about where you come from, as if identity were a straight line you could trace with a finger. I used to nod along. Now, I understood how incomplete that idea was. Where you come from is not a single source. It is years of care, years of influence, years of being seen and chosen. I had been chosen. That realization settled into me slowly, bringing with it a deep sense of steadiness. I didn't need to search for missing pieces anymore. I had stopped feeling like something essential was absent. The truth hadn't taken anything away from me. It had clarified what had always been real. And in that clarity, I felt something close to gratitude, not for the lie, but for the life that had grown despite it. Gratitude surprised me. I hadn't expected it to show up at all, let alone quietly, without effort. For a long time, I thought gratitude required clean endings, truth revealed, apologies made, balance restored. But what I felt was different. It wasn't about fairness. It was about perspective. I began to see my life parent. That mattered more than anything written in a medical file. I stopped thinking of the past as something that had been rewritten. It hadn't been erased or falsified. It had simply been recontextualized. The love I received wasn't accidental. The guidance wasn't borrowed. It was intentional. That realization softened the last remaining tension inside me. One afternoon, my mother and I sat together without the weight of unfinished conversations between us. We didn't revisit the lie. We didn't analyze it. We talked about small things, a recipe she'd forgotten, a plant that wasn't growing the way she hoped. At one point, she looked at me and said, "I'm glad you're okay." I believed her. And I believed myself when I nodded and said, "I am." I no longer needed more answers. I no longer needed validation from science or confirmation from paperwork. The truth had done its work. It had unsettled me, then steadied me, and finally released me. I understood now that some revelations arrive not to change your life, but to show you what was holding it together all along. And with that understanding, I felt ready to let this chapter rest. Not forgotten. Not denied. Just complete. I didn't notice the exact moment when the weight finally left. There was no dramatic release, no clear line between before and after. It happened the way most real changes do, quietly, in the background, while I was busy living. One morning, I filled out a medical form and paused at the section about family history. I wrote what I knew, left what I didn't, and moved on without feeling that familiar tightening in my chest. That surprised me more than anything else had. The truth had settled. Not as a secret, not as a wound, but as a fact that no longer demanded my attention. I realized then that the lie hadn't taken 40 years from me. It had simply. Distinction mattered. I thought about how easily people assume that truth must arrive early to be valid. But life doesn't work that way. Sometimes truth arrives late, and its job isn't to undo the past, it's to refine your understanding of it. I began seeing my story differently, not as a deception uncovered, but as a foundation tested. And the foundation held. My father was still my father. My mother was still my mother, flawed, human, capable of fear and regret. And I was still myself, shaped by decades of care, discipline, affection, and choice. Nothing essential had been taken away. If anything, something had been added, depth. Depth changes how you listen, how you judge, how you forgive. I noticed I was more patient with other people's hidden truths. More careful before assuming I understood someone's whole story. Less interested in neat explanations. Because I had learned firsthand how complex a single life can be beneath the surface. That lesson stayed with me, not heavy, not sharp, just present. And I knew I was close to the end of this chapter now. Not because everything had been resolved perfectly, but because I no longer needed resolution to feel whole. I think that's how stories like mine are meant to end. Not with certainty tied in a ribbon. Not with answers lined up neatly. But with a person learning how to live comfortably inside what they know, and what they don't. The blood donation changed something fundamental, but not in the way I first feared. It didn't erase my past or replace it with something unfamiliar. It simply added a layer of truth that asked me to look at my life more honestly. And when I did, I liked what I saw. I saw years of being loved without condition. I saw a father who chose me every day, without hesitation. I saw a mother who made a wrong choice and carried its weight longer than anyone ever knew. I also saw myself, mattered more than biology ever could. If you had asked me before all this who I was, I would have answered easily. Now, my answer is quieter, but stronger. I am not defined by a test result. I am not undone by a late truth. I am not less because part of my story was hidden. I am the sum of how I was raised, how I was treated, and how I chose to respond when the ground shifted beneath me. I donated blood expecting nothing more than a bandage and a cup of juice. Instead, I was handed a truth that waited 40 years to be found. It didn't break my family. It didn't erase my past. And it didn't steal my identity. It simply reminded me of something I now carry with calm certainty. Some truths don't arrive to destroy you. They arrive to show you what was real all along. And with that understanding, this story, my story, feels complete.